Next up, we have a discussion, panel discussion on what keeps the digital CXOs awake, design, differentiate, or disrupt. To be part of this discussion, I call back Dr. Luca, if you can come onto the dais. We have Sanjay Padmakar, Narkar, CTO, IDFC Bank Limited. As a CTO, Mr. Narkar is responsible to plan, design, implement IT infrastructure for futuristic digital banking across wholesale, retail, and rural banking operations for IDFC Bank in India. We have Suvo Sarkar, Senior Executive Vice President and Group Head, Retail Banking, Wealth Management, Emirates, NBD. We have Kush Saxena, CTO, MasterCard. We have Munish, Mittal, Group Head, IT and CIO, HDFC Bank. And to moderate this session, we have Lalit Kumar, Partner, Grant Thornton. Lalit is a chartered accountant in practice with more than 20 years of post-qualification experience behind him. Lalit, over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I think welcome to this session on the challenges, right? The challenges or the points which keep the digital CXOs awake in this era of design, disrupt, differentiate. In whatever sequence you may want to put it, but I think ultimately everything that one does leads to disruption in one form or the other. When I was coming to this place in the morning, I just wanted to be sure that I'm carrying my wallet within my pocket. And I was wondering, is it possible for me to travel without my wallet, which has an ID, which has a credit card and a debit card? Why I couldn't just travel with my phone, even if I have to catch a flight and go to another city? I think this is a problem statement or an expectation from a customer, which is normally set from, financial services industry, right? And my biggest dream in a financial service industry is that there is a bank account to which my salary comes, and there is a pattern of expenses that I incur. My banker is also my wealth management manager, is also my insurance keeper, is also my holiday planner, and I need not worry about anything. And after I do whatever I need to spend, he's also able to tell me this is what you're going to save towards your retirement, right? So a very futuristic statement. I think all this calls for innovation, disruption, whatever we may think and say about. We have, distinguished panelists sitting here. I think it's a good time to have their views on certain things. The way I understand disruption for enterprises. So the word disruption has different meanings for different users, right? For enterprises, it means that you are able to develop new business models, new operating models, that reduce cost, enhances customer experience, and at the same time are able to generate profits for an enterprise. We had seen, Uber giving rise to a new term called Uberization. In the financial services industry, we are seeing enterprises which are able to disburse loan when the customer provides the right kind of information at the click of a button, right? So I think the first question I would want to ask is, and this question I would direct to Munish, right? What is the most significant key driver that drives the disruption in the role that you do? For example, you're trying to create disruption in maybe operations, enhancing customer experience, or developing new apps. So what are the 3-4 factors that are always ahead in deciding which way to go?
Thank you, Lalit. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. So, you know, my take is rather simple on this. Essentially, the whether you call it disruption or whether it's caused by technology or marketplace, the the change in operating models or business models is essentially driven by three core objectives of an organization. At least talking of HDFC Bank, I think, can we continue to be relevant to our customers? That is the first most core factor in evolving the new operating or business model. Second, can we sell more? Right? And the third one is that can we increase and be relevant from a bottom line perspective? End of the day, we have stakeholders to whom the organization is accountable to, whether it's customers, whether it's investors, whether it is the country as a society, whether it is employment generation, and whatever it is. So three core models: that are you continuing to be relevant in the given marketplace, whether technology is bringing disruption? Second, can you sell more and therefore generate more revenues in a more profitable manner? And third, in this whole process, can you meet your commitments to the stakeholders in the process? So these three things, in my view, drive any kind of response to any disruption which is happening in the marketplace.
Thank you so much. I think one question, as we were talking, Suvo, you mentioned about the online banking app, Live, that has been launched at your place of work, right? Can you just enlighten us a little about, what drove that change and what changes it brought about in the customer experience, and so that, people
Sure.
are able to benefit?
Munish talked about relevance, and I think that's absolutely critical. We don't realize this, but for retail banking, today, 30 to 40% customers in most markets are millennials. The scary thought is 2030, which is 12 years from now, 70% of customers for all retail banks globally are going to be either millennials or centennials, as we call them. Now, banks today in the business models are hardly relevant to many of these customers, right? I mean, we are not traditionally prepared to deal with the requirements of customers who are millennials and centennials. Most boardrooms, most management teams of banks are made up of people who are 40, 50, 60-year-old plus. Can these can these managers reimagine banking for a segment which is going to be 70% of our customer base in 12 years' time? That's a scary thought. And one of the reasons that we decided at Emirates NBD, the largest bank in Dubai, to try and disrupt ourselves in a new way is to actually experiment with a totally new bank that we created, which is intended for millennials. And the whole idea was to bring every product, reimagine every product ground up, every process from scratch, and create a bank that is not made up of legacy processes, legacy systems, legacy people, but really a team of millennials. The entire team is a team of millennials who are actually thinking through every product for millennials. And we've seen a lot of success to the extent that our new customer acquisition now is more for Live than for the mother bank. And very soon, we expect in 5 years' time, this app will probably overtake the mother bank in terms of number of customers. May not be in profitability because the profit pools still lie with the older customers. But in terms of new acquisition, this is proving to be a huge success, primarily because we've thought through everything paperless. So everything in this bank has no paper. Everything is digitized end to end. If it doesn't fit that model, we don't do it. So the point that Munish made is very relevant is, are we prepared to face the customer of the future? And Bill Gates said many years back that customers don't need a bank, they need banking. And you just said, Lalit, that customers today need more than banking. We need a banker, insurer, a loan giver, all of that, a wealth manager rolled into one. And can a bank create an ecosystem with API linkages to all kinds of providers to be exactly what you're saying?
Thank you so much. I think this was an example where a totally new, something new was brought into being to meet the demands of the future or to cater to millennial customers. But I think all of us have legacy systems, right? Each of the enterprise will have legacy systems which have been in place with so many things now coming into place, so many disruptions to be brought in. I think one of the things that keeps digital CXOs awake is that how do you integrate the new technologies with your already existing system? How do you deal with, Sanjay, I would want to ask this question to you. How would you deal with legacy systems when you are thinking about disruption or bringing in new technologies in the financial services space?
Thanks, Lalit. I think, from our bank perspective point of view, we are just 3 years old. So, first of all, this challenge of legacy is not existing to a large extent with us. But yes, I have worked in my previous roles where the legacy systems were there in financial institutions. And the biggest challenge of those legacy systems in comparison to take up the disruption or also to look at the digital is the quality of the data. That is the biggest challenge, because the way in which the digital requires a lot of analytics to happen and to be responsive and real time. Probably the quality of the data, if it is not that good, then I think the results of the digital are not going to be that good. Second thing is that some of the rigidness which is there in the integration, which also causes the kind of the waterfall kind of a mechanism which we follow for projects, being the legacy itself. And that legacy is also causing a problem for the people, those who are serving the legacy. So the mindset of those people is also becoming a challenge when you really want to introduce the disruption. Therefore, along with that, the legacy skill sets upgradation is another challenge. Point is that how do we actually, make this happen? Now, processes are probably where the STP you can still try, but if the underlying legacy systems are not that flexible, then I think there is a requirement of a hard call to be taken that it requires to be replaced. As simple as that.
Dr. Luca, your thoughts on this? I think I would request if you can speak a few words about this question. How to deal with legacy systems when you are changing over to a disruptive technology?
I need to, fortunately in reinsurance, the legacy system problem is not as critical as it is in primary insurer, but thinking back at my experience working for Zurich Insurance, which is a primary insurer, legacy system is a disaster. It is a disaster for a variety of reasons. The reason number one is that it consists of a patching of different systems over time with no documentation available. And even if we had the documentation, it wouldn't help because it would be hundreds of thousands of pages. Nobody can master that. So, but many changes happened overnight. So basically, whenever you touch them, you need somebody to go into the code and interpret which business processes have been put into those systems. So it's a huge problem, but it's also an industry, the system integrators who are making a fortune on it in maintaining those systems. So unfortunately, also, the people who are able to master how to deal with those systems are people who can deal with such arcane computer languages such as COBOL, Pascal. It's not all Python, it's COBOL and Pascal. Those people have retired and now they're dying. It's a demography problem, it's very slow, but because it's so slow, people procrastinate. So whilst everybody is now fretting about the supercomputer taking over from humans, I think the real danger is a legacy system going out of control with nobody around to fix them. That's, I think, is a real systemic danger people are not realizing. Now, how can we do that? I think what we need is to have a machine that can actually fix them. I know there are some projects at MIT that have been pursuing successfully such an approach. That's the only way to pay for it, because you cannot have HAMA armies of computer programmers extracting the business processes. So I think there will be a disruption there in the marketplace because of some legacy system really going badly. There will be disruption because the industry of maintenance of legacy systems needs to be disrupted. This time I consciously take the word in my mouth. And I think the drive for doing so will make the difference between insurance companies able to take advantage of the tech transformation and the laggards, because those being left behind will not be able to take advantage. And what keeps me awake at night is who will be the competitors who is going to be able to take advantage whilst I can't. That is what really keeps me awake at night.
Thank you. Munish, your thoughts on this? I think you also dealing with the system, right? And how you've managed so many changes happening.
See, there are multiple ways to skin the cat. There may be not any silver bullet, but there are a few things which I may have a slightly different view. I think there are 4 or 5 aspects of running technology. In technology language, we say run the bank, grow the bank, change the bank, transform the bank, and maybe you want to add innovate, right? So if you have a disproportionate focus on transform and innovate, and you neglect run the bank and change the bank, grow the bank, you will continue to create legacy. Technology by nature is legacy when you're thinking about it. Forget acquiring it, testing it, commercializing it, juicing it out, having an ROI. This doesn't work. Technology is legacy the moment you think about it. So, our friend, the most intelligent, one of the very intelligent people who runs Microsoft has written a book called Hit Refresh, right? The only way to deal with legacy is that you hit refresh every 3 to 4 years. Talking about HDFC Bank, I think 4 times I have modernized from a single monolith distributed client-server architecture to a 3-tier web architecture to an API-based component system of microservices for each function, the entire retail lending system. Take core banking, for example. I think 5 times we have upgraded core banking to most modern technology. Now, we have not been waiting for the digital to happen in 2013 or 2014. We've been doing this every 3 to 5 years. So talking very recently, for example, I run one of the largest credit card system in the country. We have about 10 million credit cards. We're the largest issues of credit card in India. It runs on COBOL on mainframe. I'm the only bank who has a mainframe. But besides the fact that over MQ series or similar technology, we have created web services which participate in net and mobile. We've tied up with the ISV saying, let's modernize the system. So we've started a program which will, which is in implementation, will shape up in the next couple of years. It will, after, this tenure, I may not need a mainframe anymore. So it's a mindset problem. Do you pronounce your applications to be obsolete? Do you have a process? Do you have a governance framework? So I think the answer is hit refresh, start early. Recognize the problem, pronounce it's obsolete, and start working on it.
I think very well said. Thank you so much. When we talk about disruptions and the customer experiences, customers are now demanding 24/7 secure financial services. They want their data to be secured, right? I think another problem which digital CXOs have today is to deal with the mammoth data that they generate when they render financial services. Suvo, you want to throw some light on the problems that you have seen or the opportunities on data management that you see that exist?
Well, one aspect is already spoken by Sanjay about how do you maintain clean data. Obviously, technology for data has evolved leaps and bounds for the last, especially 5 years. I think it requires some pretty heavy investment in both hardware and software. I think banks have been doing it. Credit card companies like MasterCard, Visa have been doing it. Data security has become obviously absolutely critical, especially in financial services. We've seen data breaches happening, every week, and there's a Cathay Pacific one reported this morning. I think it is and plus on top, banks especially, and card companies have to deal with regulation, right? Whether it's MiFID II, whether it is GDPR, there are tons of regulation that we have to deal with. It's absolutely not an easy task. I think one of the big I think design and data are the two big Ds in terms of, the future for financial services. And the data part is a worry, especially because cybersecurity is something that, we can keep investing in, but there are people out there who are going to be one step ahead of you. If there's one thing that keeps, I think, bankers awake today, is really cybersecurity. And protection of your data, leakage of your data, keeping the data clean, is going to be deciding the winners and losers for the future. And at Emirates 70, we are working a lot in terms of improving our data warehouse, the entire access to data. We're investing in new systems. But it's a journey which, frankly, is a difficult one, and it's something that we have to keep at.
Your thoughts on this?
No, I agree with what Suvo says. The only one addition which I would like to make is that now the nature of data and the expectation of the data, what financial institutions are required to extract from the behavior aspect of the data is changing a lot. And therefore, managing a data itself is becoming a challenge. One is that, because of your transaction grows and everything, the data is growing. It requires secrecy, as what Suvo said. Also, from the point of view of cyber attacks and everything isn't. But then internally, because of the new processes, digital kind of a requirement comes in, the entire data mining, using is also increasing. So there is a huge kind of a pressure which is coming in the data management space, which goes across the bank or across the financial institution. And that is also quite demanding, because your underlying data, which is tons of data which is sitting, only the needed data which is required for business on every day to be used, to be churned, to be seen differently, and then it has to support the business. So data management as such overall is becoming a big challenge, because that underlying security and everything is still there. But even to support a new way of business, new way of digitalization, or even for that matter processes and all, and the response time, the agility of a data is increasing a lot. That is keeping a lot of pressure. Otherwise, the processes will not work fast if the responses are not fast. Your scorecards has to be agile to compute that score quickly and disburse the loan in maybe in 5 minutes. So those are the pressures which are coming on data, and your data is increasing. And even from regulators' perspective, you need to have minimum 7 years data to be stored at any given point of time. If the audit comes, you have to. So there are different strategies probably are demanding now with CIOs, that data management itself is becoming a big challenge.
So top 3 things that you would want to tell for better data management and security. Sanjay. Yes, so I think Kush, yes.
Thank you, Munish. So what is the question?
Top 3 things that an enterprise must do for better data management and security.
I have a very boring answer for that, but I won't get into the boring answer. Look, I think we see about 100 petabytes of data a year, somewhere between 80 to 100 petabytes of data a year. Not all of it is useful data. So I think developing a sense and a mechanism by which you figure out what data is useful and what you want to do with it, and which data is not useful, I think is first and foremost what you've got to do. Because otherwise you can end up spending a boatload of money and a lot of resources and actually take on a lot of liability, because data brings with it liability, especially from a regulatory standpoint, if it happens to be consumer data or merchant data and stuff like that, right? So I think I'd say data inventorying, data cataloging, and data prioritization is one. Then I think everybody does standard data warehousing and storage, so I don't, that's pretty basic. I think you've got to contextualize what data will, you've got to contextualize the environment in which you will be starting to deal with your data. And I think we are in the early days of things like GDPR, things like data privacy and so on and so forth, which bring with it a lot more responsibility on data than companies have had to deal with. And so I think developing your strategies on being hyper flexible about being able to route your data, almost thinking of storage as a service, data as a service, and data flexibility as a service is going to become very, very important for all of us. Last thing I'll mention in the context of that is anonymization. So I think carrying, it's one of the world's most meaningful data sets, and yet 100% of the data is anonymized. So I apply about 1 million rules on my data set, which strip out any personally identifiable information, and yet leave the data useful down to a cohort of 5 to 6 records, which basically represents an individual. That has been very useful for us in responding to GDPR. It's going to be very useful to us in responding to data privacy regulation all over the world. So I'd say inventorying, I'd say thinking of data as a service, anonymization.
Thank you so much. I think innovation, disruption cannot be seen flourishing in the country if there are no government policies around it. I think government plays a very crucial role, not in terms of providing laws and regulations that deal with the issues that are associated with the disruption as and when it occurs, or as it occurs. I think also as a user, right? So government itself should be a user, right? Kush, I would want to check with you, what are your thoughts on the government's role in disruption, in technology, in development? What are your thoughts on this?
So look, we are a global payments and digital commerce enablement network. The fact that we are global means we end up dealing with jurisdictions all over the world. So we spend a lot of time with, of course, regulators and government in markets like India. We are doing that in Latin America. We are doing that in Africa. We are doing that in US, Europe, all over the world, right? And the common pattern that I've seen on government engagement done right, I would say is twofold. I think government engagement done right sets context, right? And so context to me is what I would call top-down motivation, right? This is a great example of that is, the Prime Minister here saying digital India is a priority, right? Driving cashless is a priority. So I think motivation and setting top-down context, I think creating the policy frameworks for sort of incentives and economic frameworks for the entire ecosystem to participate. I think, setting the tone on what the right answer looks like. I think that's what governments do best, and they should do that, actively. And then there will be situations where the private sector is not filling the gaps that need to be filled. And in those situations, in my opinion, the government should execute, right? And I've seen many examples of that in many spaces where the private sector just isn't complying and isn't leaving large swaths of opportunity untouched. And in my mind, that's where governments should step in, and there are very many examples of where governments have done a good job with that.
Right. Cost is the main feature, when you are doing something new, what is the cost that you are going to incur? What is the return that you are going to get? I think whatever is to be done has to be always evaluated between what is the cost and what is the return. How the entities in the financial services industry are looking at the cost of disruption versus the expected returns. Munish, would you want to answer this, or Sanjay?
See, cost, when you look at in isolation, will be treated as cost. Cost looked at as strategic objective or from a business enablement perspective will be seen as investment, right? So in our bank, we have a very popular saying that technology is the dog and technology is the tail and the bank is the dog and the tail should not wag the dog, right? So we don't do anything for the sake of technology. So we have objectives like joint go-to-market with business. There should not be a business which is missed where technology is involved. So therefore, cost is not a problem. Of course, it can't be disproportionate to the overall objective of let's say, an enterprise level cost to income ratio, right? You can't be investing, let's say, $200 million on a technology which is not going to produce any result for 3 to 4 years and bump up your cost to income ratio by 3 to 4%. As I said in the first statement, there is an accountability to the stakeholders involved in the process. So in absolute terms, it is a problem. But if you put it in a context, I don't think cost is a problem when it comes to investment in technology, because there is a business objective associated with it of either growing your sales or improving your customer experience or reducing your operational costs. So that's my take on the subject.
I think, in nutshell, disruption today is a quest for continued relevance, is a challenge to attract and retain customer, is an objective to be efficient, to be able to generate profits. While there are challenges that we have talked about, I think these challenges are going to remain there. The industry is quite geared up. But what I understand, because the views are clear, absolutely clear on how to deal with these challenges, right? There could be difficulties, but I'm sure these challenges can be met with the experience that people have and with the knowledge that is available to everybody, in today's world. Any questions from the audience, we'll be happy to take. Maybe a couple of them. We've just ran out of time on the session, but if there are any questions, we'll be happy to answer. Yes, can you just pass on the mic, please? Yeah. Just one question we'll take.
Yeah.
Yeah, hi. Good evening to all the panelists. We talked about legacy system here and about the data centers and the data privacy also. I am representing ICANN Group UASG, which is Universal Acceptance Steering Group. And the objective of this group is to treat every domain equal. All the applications should treat every domain equal. So here come my question. We talked about legacy system, but the domains which are now no more into legacy, which are more than 3 characters, how are you dealing with it? How your applications are dealing with it? If a person is sending an email from a domain which is more than 3 characters, all of the bank systems are not accepting it right now. I cannot subscribe to any of your organization newsletters with my linguistic email. So how are you dealing with an interior person sitting in Rajasthan interior and sending you an email in Hindi? Your system does not accept it. When Munish said you need to refresh, I don't think it's in the agenda. So we need to work towards to bring more importance to the people who does not speak English or towards a multilingual internet. What is your take on this?
I think Munish.
You want me to answer?
Anyone.
I think Munish, you would be the best
Okay,
person.
so I'm not sure if I understand your question well, but to the extent I understand and in the interest of time, I'll try and answer. If you were talking about some address issue with respect to domain names, I don't have an answer. I haven't come across this problem so far. I will check. I can guarantee you, like we move from IPv4 to IPv6, right? There is a country regulation, there's a regulatory guidelines, and more importantly, there is a going organization agenda of my own, because I serve a large NRI population outside the country in every part of the world. So I have not faced this problem so far, but happy to address it. We'll ask my team to check, and maybe we can cycle back in some offline manner. Your second part of the question, if I've understood, is related to multilingual, Unicode, stuff like that. So, let me tell you, you don't need hundreds of languages. In India, language changes, or a dialect at least changes every 7 kilometers. Okay, within Bangalore, you can find multiple dialects of Kannada. Now the question is, are you able to communicate? So as long as you offer English, you offer one national language and one regional language in the geography you are in, that is more than enough. So we have adopted strategies like, for example, we have 14 states or 14 customer contact centers in 14 different parts of the country. We don't have one centralized call center like it is in some developed markets. Now, the essential reason we do this is because we have 3 objectives. 1, local language. 2, local employment. And 3rd, prevent the flight of the people, talent, family members into metros. Keep the people there, generate wealth there. So there are multiple ways to skin the cat. 2nd, there is artificial intelligence, which is available today. Very sophisticated engines are there to convert text to speech, speech to text, run emotion on it, have a persona, create a natural language generation. NLG is in a very early stage right now, but we can interpret at least 28 to 30 languages in various engines we put together and respond to the customer in the language customer expects to be answered and communicated with. So I don't see this as a problem. Both, willpower and your business model, your process and technology, all four areas are reasonably geared up today to handle this. End of the day, you have to serve a market. If you, it's like, in Kannada, in Karnataka, if you don't deal with your customer in Kannada, then you lose half the market. So I'm not really sure if I've understood your question and if this is a real problem. I don't see that as a problem.
All right, in the interest of time, we'll have to cut it short. One more? Okay.
Topic is more on disrupt, right? How do you see blockchain ecosystem going to disrupt the banking system, and is really a regulatory and governments across the country, right? It may not be a question only for India. Do you see, are we in a state to even accept that technology, or are we scared about the complete business transformation, not just about technical transformation, right? How will it impact? I mean, I just wanted to get some views on that.
We run into blockchain a lot from a network standpoint and a payment standpoint. Having researched it and looked at it, our sense is that it's a very useful technology for specific use cases. For a long time, there was a perspective that blockchain could replace core payment networks, consumer to merchant payment networks. And there are some fundamental technological limitations in our mind that make that difficult. You need something called real-time authorization. It's a consensus-based algorithm. Settlement times are longer. The security on blockchain itself has been questioned, and so on and so forth, right? And so for a variety of those reasons, I think the technology remains very useful. For a use case like consumer to payments, consumer to merchant payments, I don't think it applies. We do have other use cases like correspondent banking, where in fact it fits very, very well, right? So think about money moving from one bank to another bank in another country. Typically in a use case like that, you don't know how much money makes its way to the end bank. You don't know how long it takes, right? And that's because it's got multiple hops in between. Blockchain, because it actually records every aspect of the journey, great technology for that use case. So I think today it's a technology that's, the potential is use case based. I think every company's got to be researching it really closely. We invest a lot of time and money doing that. I'm sure so does everybody else. And there'll be a time when it'll become ready for mainstream adoption. And that's, that'll be the time when we'll sort of go after it.
All right, thank you for that. We're running out of time. Lalit,